Guys, Andrew Shroud. I'm here on the sideboard. I'm here with Reid Duke,
Hey.
our Season 3 Invitational champion-ish.
Runner-up.
Yeah.
But runner-up to the right person.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Lost to Tom Ross, who had already won an Invitational, so you got to lock up your seat in the Players' Championship just the same.
Yes.
And here we are. So we're here to talk about your standard deck. This is a deck that I know you worked on with Gerard Fabiano.
Yep.
So let's start at the top here with Sultai Reanimator. Mm-hmm. This is not Sidisi Reanimator.
No, this is actually the plain old-fashioned black-green Constellation deck with just a tiny twist of having blue cards in the sideboard.
Okay. How did you arrive at that particular configuration?
Well, I played the World Championships 2 weeks ago and tested a lot of standard in advance of that tournament and ended up playing black-green Constellation. But I also tested a lot of Sidisi Whip, and the main advantage that I liked of Sidisi, despite eventually setting on black-green, was the flexibility it gave you in sideboarding. Okay. So for this particular tournament, where I feel the field is a little bit more defined, I know what I'm going to mostly come up against, or so I hope. And most players are going to be playing, I think, slower decks. You know, like blue-white control, Jeskai, other Whip decks. Okay. I really valued having access to the counter spells and even some other blue sideboard cards that we'll get to, but I felt like having a couple extra come into play tap lands would be a fine price to pay for that flexibility.
Sure thing. All right. So we'll go card by card. This first frame I feel like is just obvious, right?
Right.
You're a green standard
For
deck.
me personally, these are 12 cards that I was going to have in my deck no matter what. Okay. Regardless of anything.
Sure thing. And then then we start to kind of deviate from what we expect out of a Reanimator deck a little.
So Doomwake Giant and Pharika, God of Affliction, are two cards that are just super important in these black-green mirrors. Okay. Those are cards that I feel you have to have in your deck no matter what. And once you've made the leap that you're going to play those cards, I think the Constellation theme is something that you're really happy to have. Okay. I've played Eidolon of Blossoms instead of Sidisi or the Siege Rhinos that the Abzan players go for, because I feel that these matchups are pretty grindy. Your life total doesn't matter quite as much. It's not so much about your board presence as about just getting the value out of your cards. So having the little card draw engine built into the deck is very important. Okay.
And then of course Whip, the glue. 3 Thoughtseize, 1 Commune with the Gods.
Yeah, Commune with the Gods is not a super exciting card. Standard's kind of like a fast and brutal format, so to have a card where you have to spend mana and not impact the board is a little bit of a liability, but I included 1 copy just because it helps grease the wheels, so to speak, make sure you have enough to fill your graveyard and use all of your cards to their full potential. Okay. And then Thoughtseize? Thoughtseize, really important. Good against any blue deck that's going to have Disdainful Stroke or anything like that. And I find it particularly valuable because you don't always know in Standard what your opponent's going to be up to after sideboarding. You know, if you play against a Jeskai deck, they might have End Hostilities and Dig Through Time after sideboard, or they might have Hordling Outburst and Stoke the Flames, so having Thoughtseize means there are fewer surprises and you're just more prepared to face whatever your opponent throws at you. I
hadn't really heard it presented that way, but Thoughtseize kind of like the standard Gataxian probe then.
Right,
just lets you know what's up and also stops the worst thing.
Exactly.
Hero's Downfall, Murderous Cut, the 4-1 split. So you've got some removal spells and then of course Hornet Queen.
Yeah, I'm actually down from 3 Hornet Queens to 2. Hornet Queen's an incredible card, definitely one of the reasons to play this archetype. But that said, I mean, this deck's quite on the radar. Everybody knows what's up, and they're going to be prepared with their answers to Hornet Queen. So I figured it was an important role player to still have in the deck, but not something that I wanted to lean quite as heavily on as I have in the past. Okay. And the removal spells are important. Murderous Cut in particular, you can often cast it for 1 mana in this deck, so that allows you, A, to come back from behind in the mid-game if you have a slow start, and B, I expect Blue-White Heroic to be pretty heavily played at this tournament, and just the 1 mana removal spell, very, very important there.
All right. And then rounding out the deck, a couple of one-ofs, just some more answers, basically.
Yeah, these, I wanted to include at least a little bit of enchantment removal in my main deck against both opposing Whip decks and the Jeskai Ascendancy deck. The Jeskai Ascendancy deck is very, very reliant on its namesake card. If you could take that away from them, especially given that I have Doomwake Giants, their strategy is not particularly robust if I can keep the Ascendancy off the table.
Okay. It's a mana base. We won't spend too much time talking about the mana base.
Yeah, the only main thing is just finding creative ways to fit in blue lands to support my sideboard cards.
Okay. You know, actually, I do want to. I said we're not going to talk about it, but I asked Gerard about these 2 Nykthos, and he's like, you know what? I don't really like that card. But Reid said we had to play him, and I'm not gonna say no. So.
Oddly enough, I had a very similar thought process to that. I copied this deck list originally from Lucas Blohan, who had top 8 at a Grand Prix about a month back, and I was like, Nykthos, like maybe I'll try one.
Right.
I played a couple of games with the deck, and it was immediately so obvious that I needed to have two copies of this card. The way the games play out is, you just kind of do your thing for a few turns. You're trading 1 for 1. You and your opponent are both playing on even footing, and then a turn comes in the mid game where you just explode out. You get your Nykthos going.
Sure.
You get your card draw engine going, and this is how you really bury your opponent and pull ahead.
All right. Before we move on to the sideboard, I want to talk a little bit about your preparation for this tournament, particularly with regards to the fact that this is a small tournament, and you know a lot of the players. You can put a lot of them on a pretty small range, and in fact, for you in particular, this is the second tournament in the last month or so where you've actually had to prepare this way, right? So the Players' Championship the World Championships kind of works the same way, right?
Yeah, I have actually quite a lot of experience with these small, invitation-only tournaments, and as you well know, with the Magic Online Championships that we played together, and it's different from a normal tournament in the sense that it's a little bit less about just having the most powerful deck and a little bit more about predicting exactly what your opponents are going to throw at you and trying to be well prepared for specifically the players that you're going to face.
Okay.
So a lot of my preparation for this tournament was actually like sitting down, writing down the players, researching what they played in the past, and trying to predict as well as I could what I'd be likely to face.
Okay, so were any of the decisions with this deck, were any of them made because of what you expected to face specifically?
I would say I knew that I was going to play this archetype because it's, for my money, it's the best deck, but also I have the most experience with it, and I quite like it.
Okay.
But my last couple of card choices, like particularly the enchantment removal, and my sideboard was certainly geared towards the players in this tournament.
So let's dive into that sideboard. We'll go card by card, just what's going on with each of these cards. 3 Heroes Downfall. There was one in the main deck, right?
Yeah, so I have access to the full complement. Again, just wanted the maximum amount of removal against Blue-White Heroic, but also any deck that's heavy on Planeswalkers, Heroes Downfall is pretty important because my deck doesn't have a lot of creatures that I can put into play early to attack Planeswalkers, so I really need just the direct answer against something like Ashiok or Sorin or a Johnny, Mentor of Heroes.
All right. It's funny that you bring up Ashiok. I talked to Gerard earlier. He only has one of these downfalls. You guys are lists. You worked on them together. You guys are very similar, but he had to find room for 2 Ashiok.
Yeah, which was no surprise to me. That's just Gerard's calling cards, basically. But Ashiok is pretty good in this format. I made the close decision to not include it in my deck.
Okay.
But it's very good against opposing whip decks and has applications elsewhere, control decks, everything like that. So Ashiok's good. I made the close call to not include it. He made the close call to include it, but to each their own, basically.
Right on. All right. Back to cards you actually do have in your sideboard. Disdainful Stroke and Negate.
I really value having access to these counterspells in the slow matchups. You see a really high portion of your deck in each game with these whip decks, and just being able to stop their well-placed, end hostilities or treasure cruise, or I'm naming cards, but the point is basically that you stop
whatever they're doing,
whatever the situation calls for. So both Disdainful Stroke and Negate, I think, very important cards that give you an edge in
maintaining the
matchups.
board that it favors you.
Yeah.
All right. Couple of one-ofs, some basically removal spells, and ways to adapt your removal package.
So I have 4 Murderous Cuts, 4 Heroes Downfall, which really stand alone as like the ones that you want to see in a lot of games.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to round things out with like a nice diversity. Sultai Charm is a good card that I'm happy to have against Blue-White Heroic, but I didn't want too many just in case. They play Battle-Wise Hoplite, so if it's just the cards work out that they're killing me with the Battle-Wise Hoplite and I have Sultai Charm, I'm going to feel pretty silly. I didn't want to overdo it there. Same thing is true of Bioblight. It can be good if you get it on turn 2, but if the game goes too late, it might not save you. So I didn't want to overload on these cards, but they're useful tools to have.
Cool. And then, of course, the last Thoughtseize.
Yeah, I like having access to 4 Thoughtseize in almost every matchup after sideboard, and in particular against the control decks, the Jeskai Ascendancy deck, and Blue-White Heroic. Very important.
Okay. Silence the Believers, another one of, another kind of.
This is a particular role player for Whip Mirrors because Farika, God of Affliction, is the best card by about 1,000 miles.
Okay.
And I have no other way to remove it from the board in my deck, but Silence the Believers is a good late game card that can give me a leg up in the Farika battles.
Sure thing. And then to Read the Bones.
To Read the Bones, most people are going to be bringing in a lot of removal, and in particular enchantment removal against me, trying to shut down my main deck's game plan. But if people overload on removal and I just bring in a couple of card draw spells, then I can get the better of them even if they have all the right answers.
Okay. And then rounding out our sideboard, 1 Treasure Cruise and 1 Kiora, the Crashing Wave.
Yeah, Treasure Cruise, basically just a third Read the Bones, but I'd rather draw 1 of each than 2 of either one.
Okay.
And Kiora is a card I'm pretty excited about. I've had really good experiences testing this against Abzan and sometimes other Whip decks, and it's a card that I'm happy to have against Heroic also because it's sort of a removal spell that's can do other things also. So you know, it just rounds out the deck pretty nicely.
So that does it for the deck. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like I can't think of you playing anything but a black-green or black-green X deck in this entire standard format.
Yeah, I mean I've gone from Green Devotion to Abzan to Whip and back and forth, but throughout the whole thing, it's always been 4 Caryatid, 4 Courser, 4 Thoughtseize, and I don't intend to change.
Okay, so is that a function of just sticking with what you know, or are you just playing the best cards, or is it both?
It's both. I mean, those are the cards that fit my play style, but I also think they're just really, really good. Good on both offense and defense, almost any matchup, almost any situation. Just, I think it's a mistake to not play with those cards.
Cool. Thanks for coming in and walking through it with us.
My pleasure.
Stick around. We've got plenty more coverage coming of the Players' Championship here in Roanoke.